Hello, hello, everybody. Good evening, morning, or afternoon. It's time for our final broadcast. I hope you are closing out the summer session in good spirits. I'm pretty happy because I finally graded all of your speeches, but that's not why I'm happy. I'm happy because as a group, you all did very well. I'll go over some feedback here in a moment once I send you all this broadcast link here. We always got to have that awkward introduction, where I start the broadcast by sending you a link. But we'll slam right through it. Yep, streamception there. Sorry about that. Okay, put the link in here. We send out the notice, and you should be able to watch. Okay, excellent. All right, so yeah, you as a group, folks, you did wonderfully, wonderfully. I am very happy and satisfied with your speeches. I know a few of you had emailed me over the course of the week to express anxiety. I've been thinking about how to arrange this course, and honestly, the only way that I can get you grades back sooner, I do kind of, because of my grade load, it's not just your speech I'm grading, not just this class I'm grading, but other ones as well. It's really difficult for me to get, 80 speeches times 5 minutes, that kind of workload done in less than a week. So the only thing I could do is have the speeches be due closer together, simply to give us more time that way. It's kind of difficult. I'm sure I'll figure out something or a new grading method, or I'll have you turn in. Anyway, the point is, it was difficult for me. Not difficult, but it's I understand your anxiety because the way that I do it with the giving you a whole week to do your assignment and then taking a week to grade it, it basically is half the semester. That's 2 weeks out of a 4-week semester. That's half of a semester that you don't necessarily know how you're doing. Um, I am open to feedback about if you have any specific ideas about how you can get some more interaction. I'm not saying that I taught this course the best way it can be taught. In fact, this is the fourth overall time I've done it, and the second time, well, technically still the first time I've done it in a 4-week format. So, I'm probably making all sorts of mistakes that my more seasoned peers don't have to make. But anyway, the point is, it was more important. I feel like I was justified in taking or giving you rather a long time to do the speeches because the work you've turned in is pretty phenomenal there. So that's what you should take away from that rambly little rant. Um, Tonight we really have kind of a narrow agenda. Oh, hello there. I'll type in chat too. Um, Tonight we have a fairly good agenda. We're going to look at an example of a persuasive speech. I'll give some feedback about that, as well as some feedback in general about your informative speeches. I'm going to kind of slam that together in an all-inclusive hint and tips section that we'll fill out here on this lovely blank Word document screen, which I know is just the best thing to look at when you're watching a video. um, and then we'll go over some visual aid tips because I can't let you pass well, I suppose you can pass mathematically speaking, but I can't let you through an entire speech course without at least some talk about a good visual aid design. In actuality, a lot of the topics that we talk about in this class are actually covered in more detail in other courses. Like, there literally is an entire course about informative speaking. There is an entire course about persuasion. Not just persuasion, but then it's broken up into 2 other sections: rhetoric, and then persuasion as a separate thing. And yeah, there is a topic of, or there is a class called Advanced Presentations where the 300 level course where you talk about specifically about designing visual aids. So a lot of this stuff is going to be basic information to get you acclimated to these ideas. And if you are interested in any of this stuff, there are other classes for you that will intensely examine them. I don't want you to feel like just because I'm covering this last that it means that it's somehow unimportant. Rather, it's this class is kind of what we would call a survey course. It's kind of going through all of the various skills. Maybe you'll find, and hopefully you'll find it useful. But anyway, so that's the agenda tonight. It's really just two things: persuasive speech example, visual aid design, and then that pretty much wraps up our summer session. I see that the viewer count's going up, so that means it's probably a great time to segue into the actual example. This speech is not a student speech. It is a sample created by another university that's freely available online. The person is, as probably the first comment on the YouTube video, if you saw it briefly there, was that the person is speaking to a group of mannequins. But the speech is pretty well done, and we'll talk about maybe some faux pas that are made and that. But if you want to follow along as I'm rambling on here, you need to be looking in your workbook at the instructor's persuasive speech evaluation form. Those are the criteria that I will apply to your speech. If you look at your feedback for your informative speech, and again, all of you should have that graded, and there should be written feedback that will tell you. I don't necessarily comment on each bullet point. Instead, I comment on each of the areas, or try to. But honestly, there were so many good speeches in this last batch. I really am not concerned that you guys don't, that you might, mess up at this late stage. So I hope you take comfort in that. Instead, I think we're doing pretty well. So I'm pretty happy with that. I see I'm rambling to buy you time to kind of open your book and flip to that evaluation page. So if you're one of the people that are watching live, it would be helpful maybe either you can take notes on that paper, on that evaluation sheet, for how this speaker performs relative to that criteria. And you can do that too if you're not watching live. But let's go ahead and watch this example speech. Go ahead and kind of compare it to the bullet points on that grade sheet in your workbook. Again, that's the instructor's persuasive speech grade sheet. Depending on what edition you have of the book, it'll be on a different page, but it'll be there. Just look at the table of contents. See, I'm continuing to buy time for you to flip to that. But let's go ahead and get started. So I'll present this with no further comment. Then we'll talk about it afterwards.
In Seattle, 9 young athletes gathered at the starting line of the 100-yard dash. At the gun, they all started off, not exactly in a dash, but with the desire to run the race to the finish and win. All except one little boy, who stumbled on the asphalt, tumbled over a couple of times, and began to cry. The other runners heard the boy's cry. They stopped. They looked back. Then they all went back to the boy's side. Every single one of them. One girl with Down syndrome kissed him and said, "This will make it better." Then all 9 linked arms and walked to the finish line, together. These athletes were not competing on national television. They were not sponsored or idolized, but they were given the opportunity to flourish under the glow of their own spotlight, to feel the brush of the ribbon cross their chests as they ran through their own finish line in their own Olympics, the Special Olympics. Founded in 1968, Special Olympics invited the world to let go of limiting views, unyielding prejudices, and ignorant misconceptions about people with cognitive disabilities, and to embrace the idea that they can be respected, valued, contributing members of society. Just think, one of the kids who ran through that finish line could have fallen into your arms, or maybe one day could be your own child. After working as a volunteer for the Special Olympics and doing additional research for this speech, I'd like to encourage you to become involved as a volunteer for the Special Olympics. We'll start by looking at the need for volunteers. According to the Special Olympics website, more than 1.3 million people participate in the Special Olympics around the world. Participants must be at least 8 years old and be identified as having a cognitive or intellectual disability. There are currently 200 Special Olympics programs running in over 150 countries. So as Special Olympics continues to grow, so does the need for volunteers. Here in Wisconsin, there are 10,000 athletes and 3,500 volunteer coaches. But because of all the individual attention required by Special Olympics athletes, there's always a need for more volunteer coaches, or for loads of other volunteers as well. Now you know the need for Special Olympics volunteers, so the question is, what can you do to help? The answer is, become a volunteer. The most obvious way to become a volunteer is to become a coach. Now, you don't have to be a great athlete. You don't have to have any prior coaching experience. Special Olympics offers a general course on the principles of coaching in addition to a mentoring program in which the new coaches receive guidance from the experienced coaches. And if you don't want to be a coach, there's other ways to help out as well. You can work behind the scenes by assisting in fundraising or organizing events or any of the other countless details involved in running a huge organization such as Special Olympics. It's also very important that you know that your contribution to Special Olympics can last from a day to a year to a lifetime, depending on the level of commitment that you're ready to make. No matter how you decide to help, I guarantee you that working with the Special Olympics will be immensely rewarding. As a coach, your instruction and support will help your athletes develop physical skills, while your interaction and friendship will help them develop socially. Rana Vanderslice, author of the article Special Olympics, Beneficial to All, reports that individuals who get involved in sports and recreation through Special Olympics develop larger networks of friends, are more likely to socialize with others, and receive more social support. But it's not just the athletes who benefit from Special Olympics. In my case, working with Special Olympics is one of the most gratifying things I have ever done in my life. Because not only do I have the satisfaction that comes from helping others improve the quality of their lives, but I've met so many amazing people and met so many great friends that really I would not trade the experience for anything. Now you know the need for Special Olympics volunteers, some ways that you can help out, and the benefits for the volunteers and athletes alike. So now I'd like to ask you to take the step of getting involved with the Special Olympics. If you want more information, you can check out the website for the Special Olympics or visit the local headquarters located on Monona Drive here in Madison. I also have brochures with contact information that I'll be handing out after the speech. I know that you may not have a lot of time available right now, but you can volunteer for the time that fits your schedule. The most important thing is to get involved in some capacity for whatever amount of time that you can manage. Remember the 9 children I mentioned at the beginning of this speech. Think of their happiness and their support for one another. Think of how much they gained from running in that race. And think of how you can help others experience the same benefits as they strive to fulfill the motto of the Special Olympics. Let me win, but if I can't win, let me be brave in the attempt.
All right, that was some lovely canned applause there. Like I said, that speech was, I'm clicking around here. That speech was recorded in a studio with some mannequins, so that's partly why no one was moving around. Another comment that I actually had, though, was the first thing that a lot of students say when they watch that speech is just how well, how not just the confidence of delivery, but how well rehearsed it was. It was very clear that that speaker had been coached and practiced that speech for quite a while. That was not necessarily what we would call an extemporaneous performance. Well, it was more of a performance type performance. All right. I won't bore you too much with this, but there is a difference in philosophies, even within Ball State's department, about what public speaking is. Is it more of a thinking activity, or is it more of a performance activity? A performance activity making it more like acting. And of course, my philosophy is that it's actually a thinking activity. That comes back from my background as a debate coach. The point I'm trying to make here is that you shouldn't hold yourself to the perfect standard that maybe that speaker was trying to hold herself to. It was very clear that she had her gestures marked out on her outline. She had her vocal inflection probably marked out in her script as well. She had probably memorized that script or that speech as well. And really, the thing that she was manipulating at the front of the screen was just a prop. Um, it's not something that you need to emulate, is what I'm trying to describe here. What I really want you to look at, and again, if you want to look at the speech again, you can kind of just rewind the video, um, is the way that she structured that speech and focus less on how she delivered it. That's usually something that people comment on, is that, wow, she was, really polished. I could never do that. Well, quite frankly, I could never do that either. I've been in public speaking with the debate team since the year 2000, so that's a nice round number. So that's 17 years I've been speaking on the weekends during the school year. So that I've probably spoken, literally thousands of hours over the years. And I'll never, ever, ever, ever sound like that, because I never, ever would encourage you to rehearse like you're trying to get like an acting role or something like that. So I'll just kind of put that out there. But the first, let's go ahead and see, I'm tripping over my own words. Already messed it up. Gotta cut the video and edit it. No, I'm just kidding. Let's go on to some more substantive things. So there are a couple of things that I like that she did, that quite frankly most of you already do. So hopefully this just kind of reinforces the habits that you have developed through the course. Her introduction included an interesting story. So she would have gotten high marks there. She had the list, the preview. Okay, so she had that, and that was very good. Now I know I'm skipping around on the rubric here, but when we went back to the conclusion at the end of the speech, her conclusion actually had you recall the story in the introduction, and that's very effective in a persuasive type format. Okay. There are a couple of things that you can do. I'm not saying that this is the method you should use. If you already have chosen a method, like just doing a startling statistic, or completing a full story, or an anecdote in your introduction, that's fine. And that's kind of what she did too, now that I think of it. But usually what people do in a persuasive speech, if you're going to use an anecdote, is they'll probably leave the story on a cliffhanger, and then you complete the cliffhanger in the intro, or in the conclusion. That's just one method, like I said. But anyway, so her introduction and conclusion was excellent. She had the preview. She also had the review in the conclusion, and her body was the body of her speech was good. It was logically organized, and one thing that I noticed that she did that is important is that she mentioned specifically the word need and the word solution. Okay, in her speech. This is something that you should do, and I know that one of the questions, didn't see a preview of the speech. Yeah, it was. I think you're mentioning maybe where she previewed her main points. She only had two main points, which was you need to you need to volunteer, and the next main point was here's how you can do so. It was very quick. It was in fact one sentence long. I'm kind of tempted to go back and look for it actually. But anyway, it was there. Now that I've looked at the chat window, I've noticed that the video is frozen. I hope that hasn't happened to other people. Thanks, Brian. Anyway, no, but it was there. It was very quick, and that's okay when you have a simple persuasive speech like this. And I guess it's not really simple, but when you have two main points and here's what I think you need and here's how you do it, is basically your preview. That's totally appropriate. Um, and again, introductions really shouldn't be all that long. In a 5-minute speech or a 6-minute speech, your introduction really shouldn't be more than a minute itself. If you're going on substantially more than 1 minute, that lets you know that you probably need to cut something from the introduction in order to just make it a little less unwieldy. That's not something I literally time when I watch your speeches, by the way, um, but it's kind of like a good baseline or good figure. Obviously, the longer the presentation is, the longer the introduction can be. If you're going to do an hour-long presentation, your introduction could be 10 minutes. Um, but the idea is that the introduction and conclusion together maybe are not more than between 10 to 15% of the overall speaking time. And she had a lot of word economy there to try to get those things done. You did notice also that and I know I heard this for sure, she also had a good uh, credentials section, where she talked about how credible she was. And her credentials were just like yours. I have done this thing in the past, and I've researched it for this assignment. And she didn't say it exactly like that, but that's what she said. And that's totally fine. Again, the idea here is that you're building a habit to mention a credibility statement, not necessarily that you want to build yourself up as an expert. Your expertise is being built up through your experiences over your entire Ball State education. Right now, we're just trying to work on making sure you mention that you've done work or you've done research on this topic. So excellent. I'm looking at the chat here. It doesn't seem like there are any other questions or suggestions or comments. Okay. All right. So where was I? Anyway, the body was pretty good. And you'll notice also that she followed the Toolman model, which again is this claim data warrant model, in which the claim again is a statement want the audience to believe. And you follow that up with data, researched information that you think supports her claim, and a warrant, a statement where you explain why the information supports your claim. Right? So she did follow that model, and there was some confusion. This is what I was building up to. There was some confusion. Some of you had emailed me because it seemed kind of inconsistent with that Monroe's motivated sequence model. And one of the reasons why I wanted to show you this example was it actually doesn't, because the way the claim data warrant model works is that your claim is kind of set out for you. Your first claim should be about the need for change, or the need to do something, or the need to believe something that people don't already do or believe. So part of your claim statement there is already worked out for you. Similarly, your second claim, you can have more than one argument or more than one claim in your need main point. Like you can have a sub point that's also an argument, also a claim data warrant set. But your second part of your speech is also going to be an argument that's kind of written for you, in that, insert solution here. Insert solution will address need I just explained, right? That's kind of how you introduce your solution step, and that's also going to be a claim as itself. So it's really not that the idea that the claim data warrant is something I'm tacking on to your Monroe's motivated sequence outline. It's really more of an explanation of how to phrase or how to organize those main points for yourself. And I hope that that re-explanation is helpful. And if it's not, go ahead and send me another email. I regret to say that I'm kind of hoping that this explanation right now will save me some time in writing those replies. You had written me just this afternoon, so I hope that addresses your question. And like I said, if not, send me another email, and I'll definitely get to that. But I think this explanation kind of hopefully will clear things up a little bit. Um, so in broad terms, again, her delivery was pretty good. Don't hold yourself to that standard. She was coached, she had memorized it, and that's not what you're expected to do. One of the things that, at least for everybody that teaches this course, especially about memorization, is the idea that our course is more practical. In quote unquote the real life, you're not necessarily going to be asked to give a performance-oriented speech. Your boss or your superior officer or whatever you're preparing yourself for isn't going to say, give me an 8-minute speech in which you use humor to distract from the bad economic downturn our company has experienced. They're not going to say stuff like that to you. At least I hope they wouldn't. They're just really going to say, you worked on the financial model. Tell us about it. And away you go off to the races in that moment. That's why we embrace what we call an extemporaneous style. I'm just going to write this out here. It's not really about the speech, but I feel it's important for you to know. Extemporaneous style speaking is about speaking from things you already know, want to talk about, but you don't have a verbatim script nor a verbatim memory of what to say. Okay, it's kind of, if you want to think of it as if impromptu speaking is speaking on something random suddenly, and something random might be, you talk about the rainforest. Then extemporaneous style is kind of between that and memorizing your speech. Extemporaneous is about knowing what the topic is because probably you've worked on a project or you've worked on whatever your boss had you work on, and then they ask you to explain it in a public setting. That's an extemporaneous style because you already know what you want to say, but you don't have maybe the words strung together yet, and that's something that you think about. Again, like I said, the philosophy here is that public speaking is a thinking activity. So you would think about how to string them together as you're talking. It's actually easier than memorization, at least it is in my opinion. And it's certainly easier than being given a truly random assignment. So anyway, the point is that's kind of how we encourage you to do it. So speaking from your outlines, for example, is much better than speaking from a script. And at least from what I can tell, while you were giving your speeches and your informative speech, you all did an excellent job on that point. So again, great job. Okay, so that's kind of what I wanted to go over when I looked at this persuasive speech. It was just to give you an example and some pointers about the introduction, conclusion, and claim data warrants and how they're kind of related to Monroe's sequence. So she did go over Monroe's sequence, but she, again, and a way that you can tell that is that she actually mentioned these specific words. And if you want to use those words specifically too, that's fine. I'm not going to take off if you don't use those words. I really just need the elements there. You should have an element where you talk about the need and an element where you have maybe some kind of solution or satisfaction that you want people to implement. You don't have to use those words exactly, but it helps. Don't get obsessed again with the delivery style. Again, that's a different kind of delivery style. Just pay more attention to how she structured her message, really. Okay. Doesn't seem like there are any other questions from chat. They're kind of just chatting away there. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Let me know if you need to have any questions about the example or any questions about the assignment. We're going to kind of shift gears here and talk about the last academic topic. Oh, I have this out of order. Oh, golly gosh. The last topic here, which is about visual aids, and this is going to be part of your last discussion assignment as well. we'll explain that when we get to it. Creating good visual aids is probably more difficult than the actual public speaking itself. I know that might sound kind of silly to a lot of us that maybe dread public speaking, but I've found that extemporaneously giving a speech is a lot more comfortable than being asked to prepare a 20-slide presentation on something, because I'm sitting there thinking, oh great, how do I figure out what information to put on the slide? And so hopefully there are some broad guidelines here that I would like to go over with you that can help you organize that. So one of those, we'll talk about here. We'll start a new page here, and I'll post this as well as an announcement. Not necessarily this stuff up here, but this stuff here. So visual aid principles. So one of the things that you should take a look at when you're doing a visual aid, and this is a good example here, not necessarily a good example because it's good, it's a good example of a bad example actually. Follow all of that, because it makes some common mistakes. One of the common mistakes that are made here is that people, when they're thinking about what to put on the slide, they'll often write a big block of text. As you can see here, I won't read it out loud to you all, but you can see that this is literally 2 paragraphs on a PowerPoint slide. And that is not quite right. Good PowerPoint slides, and this is what we should write down here under the visual aid principles. Good slides ride a fine line between being clear and self-explanatory and needing additional explanation from the speaker. Remember, because these PowerPoints or these visual aids, whatever, or posters, these principles are apply to all of those various things. You need to have something that's clear, and this is pretty clear what the information is, but it's too far on that one side of this, I guess we'll call it a spectrum of design. Right? There is no reason to have someone actually give a speech about Mount Abu here, because you can literally just read about it. Right? And probably whoever made this PowerPoint is reading off of the slide. That's not necessarily, reading off of the slide isn't necessarily bad. In fact, teachers do it all the time in classes to keep ourselves aware of where we are in our lecture. But there's no reason to have a speaker here because all the information is printed on the slide. There's also a second problem with this slide here. So a way to fix this would be maybe to have just 1 or 2 of these statistics on this slide, and then have the rest of the information be spoken aloud. That's an easy fix. Another thing that this slide does that's another problem, and this is going to be another principle, is that it's usually better to have a slide not just with contrasting colors, but with the same solid color. So I guess that's 2 principles. Make sure you contrast the background with the text, which arguably, I'll be honest, I went to Carmel High School. If those of you from Indiana are familiar with it, our colors are blue and gold. I think blue and gold go well together. Like a typical Carmelite. But the problem with blue and gold in this particular slide is that as we move down the page here, or down the slide, I guess, you'll see that the colors actually get lighter. And as they get lighter, the text gets less and less distinct. All right, so that shows you 2 things. One, a different color text should probably be used here. A lot of people will say simply to avoid yellow. I try not to endorse hard and fast rules like that, but like season over here, like is totally lost in the mountain here. This paragraph here, this part of the paragraph, to me is hard to read because of the fact that it's a light color on now a light color. So the third principle here is solid backgrounds are usually the best. In fact, I am really struggling to come up with an exception to this principle right here. Like I said, people can debate about a good background color or a good contrast. That's kind of subjective. But I really can't think of a better way to have. One of the reasons why I even use the Word documents is because there's very little in the way of getting in between the text and you and the audience. But anyway, so solid backgrounds are usually the best, if not always the best. So that's kind of the two problems with this slide, and they're very common problems. I mean, it looks fancy, the background looks kind of fun, but it doesn't really work. This word here is totally garbled. These words here are not. I don't know what's going on with YouTube tonight. The video is freezing on my preview. I really hope it's not freezing for you guys. I'm sitting here hitting refresh a lot. Anyway, if there's a problem with it, I'll just upload the recording, traditional video. Anywho, so that's the problem with these two slides. Let's go ahead and move on to our next one. Boy, this is one right away. Again, we see kind of, I think, a reinforcement of good old principle number 3 here. Solid backgrounds are usually the best. This is a painting. It's a pretty famous painting. Of course, the name escapes me right as we're talking about it, but this is a slide, I think, about education. And the title of this painting, yes, I got it, is like Socrates at the Academy, or Plato at the Academy, something like that. It's a classical, it's a Renaissance painting about a classical philosophy and a classical academy. So in that regard, it's like a very well selected background picture. But the reality is that number one, the flowchart's pretty busy, and number two, having all this color and contrast and lines and things associated with the painting further confuses it. Literally, if this was just a white background, it would be better. I know that for a lot of us, the compulsion when designing a visual aid is, more work equals more good. So there was a lot of work put in here, but a lot of that work was wasted because it's a nice thematic background, but God, it just makes things worse than they are. Speaking about bad things, let's move on to a new principle. There is such a thing as too much information, as we kind of got from this point here, but generally speaking, flowcharts should not be so complex. They take up most of the space. And this is, again, a subjective idea, but there's far too many things pointing at other things and overlapping each other, particularly over here, for anyone to make sense of what's trying to be related to the bubbles. Okay. Like over here, like I think these are 2 arrow points. I can't tell because they're bleeding into each other. I can't tell if this is something that is because of the way this little gap here is, and I don't even know if you can see it because, again, the sizing is not very good, but that's not necessarily a problem with the slide. It's just a problem with the image. I can't tell if this is leading from this bubble to this bubble or going the opposite way. There's just so much stuff in the way. Over here is kind of a mess. It looks like there's a couple of origination points here and an arrow pointing to it. I'm not even going to attempt to figure out what's going to or from the Bible over here. So you can see that it's quite busy. If you want to do a flow chart, it needs to be simple enough that clearly tell where the arrows are. You can clearly tell what's at the center. Quite frankly, I don't even know. I mean, I can read the little thought bubbles and come to a good estimation that this is something about E-Tech 550 or 540. But is it about remediation of writing? Because this is kind of centrally located. Or is it about this? Because this is like the biggest bubble right at the top of the page. Or even is it about, central philosophy here? Because that's smack dab in the middle. It's not really clear because whoever made this slide has a very complex thought pattern. And that's great for someone in the 500 level course. But Um, this could easily have been broken down into several slides, several different flowcharts, and that would have been better. It would have required less effort, and it would have increased comprehension. So maybe that's one of the principles. I don't know if it's really a design principle, but I'll put in parentheses here. Sometimes less is more. Less or more. Less is more. Just because it took you 5 hours to assemble one slide does not make it a good slide. This took a lot of time, and it's very unclear. So I think that's all I really had to rant about for this slide. Again, if you find something, and that kind of goes for this example too. If you find that your slide is getting wordy or is getting busy, to use another more general term, it's probably a good idea for you to just take that content and divide it among multiple slides. Don't feel like you need to force anything onto one particular slide. Here's the next little example here. We're getting closer to what a good slide is. And that's kind of the progression I want to go through. This is a clearly labeled slide. It's about the budget development process. It even has a little explanation here at the top that kind of goes along that line of being self-explanatory yet needing some explanation. Like, I can tell that the beginning balance plus the revenues minus the expenditures is the ending balance. They can then explain how the beginning balance is calculated, or how the revenues are calculated, or what makes up the expenditures. So it is that fine line between I know what this is immediately and also needing some more explanation. However, this slide kind of does start to fall apart. This is about the budget development process. And when you think about a process, I think about steps. So what is this here? Well, it's a big word named budget with a bunch of things pointing to it. Now, I know that creating a budget is an incredibly complex process, but that's the problem, is that this slide is actually not about the process. So either there's two problems here, or there's one of two problems. Either this slide is mislabeled because it doesn't display a process, or well, I guess that's really it. I was thinking it goes the other way. Maybe this should be labeled, budget development factors or something like that, and just be a visual aid about listing out the factors. Because right now this is not a process explanation, right? This is just a bunch of words pointing at the word budget. So the next principle is make sure your visual aid is what it says. A process should involve steps. In this particular example, a chart should involve visuals, progression. A graph should include a graph. Stuff like that. You'd think this is kind of like no duh advice, but this happens a lot. This happens a lot. This does not help us understand the process. Really the only thing that's like quote unquote correct on this slide is this top thing up here. Also, there might be, and this is not really enough to be a principle, but there are some questionable decisions about the coloring here. Just from looking at things that are similar colors, it seems like there might be a color scheme involved, and maybe there should be a key. And I'm going to write this as a principle. It's like, if you need a key, include one. Okay, it doesn't clutter things up. I know that just seems kind of, we just looked at a cluttered slide here, but the reality is that a slide with this much negative space means unoccupied space. A key here could have been very helpful in figuring out what kinds of the broad topic areas these words represent. So, but it's getting closer, and the background's pretty good. So, I mean, it's not a solid color like I recommended, but the design is not obtrusive anyway, I don't think. So, okay, now we're getting kind of closer and closer, and in fact, this might actually be a good visual aid. This is from former speaker John Boehner. or if you really prefer, Speaker John Boner. Um, sorry guys, I had to. Um, whether or not you disagree or agree with the content on this slide, this is a decent to good PowerPoint slide or visual aid. I think this is actually kind of a poster here. But it has a clear title at the top. The information is not wordy, but does require explanation from a speaker. So it's pretty clear that they're talking about the sequestration process here. I just realized this must be a screenshot because there you can see the I bar there for the cursor. But anyway, you can tell this is exactly like one bullet point is one sentence, and that's really all you need on a PowerPoint slide. If I were to critique it and say the way this could be improved, it might be like maybe down here there's a couple sentences. I mean, am I going to take off points because you have more than one sentence per bullet point? No. But generally speaking, if you're going on to 3 sentences like this one, that's a paragraph. Generally you don't want paragraphs on your PowerPoints. You want one sentence or even just a keyword or phrase and leave it at that, because that's how you're going to ride that special line between being clear and self-explanatory and needing additional explanation from the speaker. A good phrase, a good keyword, or a good single sentence will make things clear, while also needing you as a speaker to explain things, and that's where you want your visual aid. Once you start having 3, 4, 5 sentences per bullet point, you're writing a paper at that point. It might be a PowerPoint slide, but you're writing a paper, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so how do you make a good visual aid? I've got really just kind of 2 pieces of advice here that are objective and that you can really measure, as opposed to, pick good colors. What are good colors? Well, whatever. So here's some objective advice for you. These is an example of a sans serif font, which is in this case Helvetica. It's usually preferable to use what we call a sans serif font on your PowerPoint slides. So this is use a sans serif font. A serif. Here, let's. I'll show you this here. Times New Roman. A serif are these little lines here at the beginning and end of the S, on the capital letters. Usually, like the T has these lines that go down vertically from the horizontal bar here on the T. That's a serif. The reason why you want a sans serif font is because the serifs can interfere with the clarity of the words. Okay, so that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is that you should use 24 point or higher font. So this is Helvetica 24 point, and I made sure to use this image the way it is on the because it shows you a pretty good size scaling for how it looks. This is actually fairly small in my opinion, but certainly 18 point and 12 point is way too small for anyone to see if there's any kind of distance between them and the screen. So start at 24 point and go higher. 36 points is actually fairly good. And of course 48 points would be better for maybe like the header and stuff like that. But the idea here is between 24 and 36 points. You don't want to start, if you're typing not so much on your slide that you're using this size, you're not doing it right. All these bubbles should be in at least 24 points. So that's another hint to whoever made this slide that they should cut this into different pieces instead of making a one slide to rule them all. Is the size of your font. Just keep it at 24. Go on to new slides instead of trying to make things miniature. Okay, so that's kind of the tip there. 24 point font higher. Okay. The next one here is kind of last is that this is kind of self-explanatory. A mixture of upper and lowercase letters is easier to read and quickly and accurately and takes up less space on the slide. As you can see, this box here is much smaller than this box here. So if you're looking for ways to be economical with space on a slide, get rid of your caps. And that's a reference to one of my colleagues who has a lot of I don't know, we'll call them street saying advice, or it's actually about speech, but it sounds like street slang, I guess. But yeah, you want to control your caps. Just because the caps make it bigger, it doesn't necessarily make it easier to read. And I hope that seeing these two things right next to each other kind of illustrate that point better than I could ever explain verbally. We read with a mixture of upper and lowercase letters. We're trained to do that, at least as English speakers. So it is just less taxing to read this way. Not to mention the internet custom that if it's all in uppercase, you're shouting at somebody. That's just so you want to mix up lower and uppercase. Okay. So there you go. There are 9 visual principles that you can use when designing your visual aids. So you're probably wondering, what exactly are we going to do with this discussion board assignment that you mentioned? Well, it's going to involve these visual principles. What I would like for you to do by Sunday, technically, actually, not get in trouble here. By Friday the 21st, midnight, but I will accept Sunday. And by midnight, I mean 11:59 p.m. Like make that clear too. I would like for you to create, go to the discussion board and create one PowerPoint slide that you think would be a good visual aid for your persuasive speech. And then what I would like for you to do, I know, sorry, there's an awkward pause there. Someone was knocking on the door to my little studio here, and I'm not sure, probably was the cat. And then the next thing I would like for you to do is to look at 2 other students' slides and give them advice using above 9 principles on whether or not should consider editing their slide. Okay. If not, of course, not why you they follow all 9 principles. Okay. And let me explain here that again, don't bash your classmates. Just say something like, you designed a great slide there, but I don't think that the color for the background was text, or your background was too busy visually. I think you should change it to a more solid color. Stuff like that. Don't be like, man, that PowerPoint slide sucks. Blue and gold sucks. Ugh. Just kind of explain politely that it wasn't contrasting well in your eyes, right? Or you could say, this was a pretty good slide. Use the right point font. You went through all the 9 principles, and I can tell that. So that's your assignment. Okay, so that's another 3 posts by Friday or a Sunday. That's the discussion board assignment for the week. It's quick, it's dirty. It's already about work you're already doing. Shouldn't be, hopefully, that difficult to do. Okay. Yep. Are there any questions from the live audience? I think we're good to go here. And just for accountability, while I'm waiting for them, I'm going to actually create the discussion board assignment in front of y'all so that you can see, I'll see that it's posted and ready to go. The forum. A discussion activity. Copy and paste these. There. Make sure you can edit your own posts, and away we go. All right. Well, cool beans. I did notice that we were kind of skimpy on this, where there's 20 people in the class and only 13 posted the peer critique. I know that a fair number of you ended up turning in your speeches late, and I'm pretty sure that's probably what the problem was. But I did have pretty much everybody turn in their informative speech. So maybe didn't know to do that, but that's probably going to cost some points. I'm just throwing that out there to make sure that you prioritize doing this one. Okay, there's a question for afterwards. Okay. Well, if none of the other people watching, I do see on my special visual counter here, there's 3 people in chat and 7 people watching total. So if no one else has any questions, I guess we'll wrap it up. Once again, I'm confident in your abilities to do this assignment. I'm not just referring to, of course, this assignment here. I'm talking also about the persuasive speech. I know that some of you were anxious about not having a grade or knowing what your grades were until either yesterday or today when I finally finished your formative speech grade. But you're all doing well. I can tell that you're watching the videos, you're keeping up with the work, you're doing what you need to do. The lowest grade that I think I gave was a 75%, and that was kind of an unusual situation as well. So I mean, there's no one here that I think needs to worry. Just make sure you get your work done and that you get it that you get it on time. If you need an extension, please let me know as soon as possible. Friday is approaching. I will accept requests for an extension all the way through until like the end of day tomorrow. So if you think there's a reason why you might need to extend it, let me know. Please do be aware that if you do turn it in on Sunday or even early Monday morning, and by early I mean like 2 a.m. That I probably won't be able to give you the same level of written feedback, if any written feedback, that I gave you on your informative speech, simply because I have to have the grades turned in by 4 o'clock. I have almost, 100 things literally that I have to grade. I just don't have time to write the 2 or 3 paragraphs, or the 1 or 2 paragraphs, I should say. That's probably more reasonable, that I did for your informative speech. So please do keep that in mind. However, if you do turn it in on Friday, I will be able to give you feedback. But if you're turning it in on Sunday, or like I said, early on Monday morning, I just won't have the time to write all that. So that's how that is going to shake out. Okay, folks, thanks again for watching. We're just at about an hour, so this was a great semester. I enjoyed teaching it. I probably will release a video before, or rather after I get all your final grades in, just to kind of decompress you from the class and provide you some information that I think is useful. It's not going to be something you'd be tested on or anything, but things that I think hopefully will provide you some closure for the course. Thanks again for being with me on my last, not last, but rather the opposite, one of my first online courses. Thanks so much for being patient with me. I'll talk to you later.